Thank you, Mike, and it's very, very good to be with you. And thank you for making the time to just take a break from work and reflect on some very important issues. These three words are very big words. And so all I'm trying to do is to slim down or dumb down to be quite digestible concepts for you. The slide will be available to you, and I encourage you to meet with your team to go through some of these concepts so that there's kind of a subtle team building. All right, so what would I do today? What I will do is to work with you to go through, so now I need to press to change slide. So what I would like to do is to work with you on these three concepts: disruption, anxiety, and self. But my focus is really on the last sentence. In this context, how do you and I need to do, what do we need to do to maintain our impact and effectiveness? So let me take you through one word at a time. I apologize if I go fast, but do send in your question that Mike will be filtering. So disruption is a very commonly used word, but its origin is in the 15th century from the medical community. Every time I say laceration of tissue, I have to close my eyes because it's actually giving me a really horrific imagery. It really means taking apart, break, shatter, split, forcible removing things from one another. So the connotation is actually very, very powerfully negative. Now, of course, the outcome of disruption could also be positive, but the act of disruption is actually quite violent. And disruption often comes with the connotation of change, of loss, particularly dealing change, loss of continuity, stability, status quo. But you and I, as OD intervener, would actually want to find out how much impact this disruption has on people and system. Well, so the question is all depends. Depends on what? Depends on the what, the how, and how much. So what are you intervening and how are you intervening? Because in OD, there's two intervening principles. One is you never intervene deeper than what is necessary. And number two, you intervene in accordance to the readiness and capability of. Two are very powerful criteria for OD intervention. And so the other depend on the strength, the pace, and the intensity of that disruptive force. And then also whether the system can sustain the impact and whether they have the capacity. So let's stop for a minute to think about the pandemic. The pandemic disruptive force is horrendous because there's not one single area of life that the pandemic situation is not disrupting. The strength, the speed, the pace, the intensity are very, very powerful. No one can escape. And not, almost every area of system life, community life, societal life are being impacted. And the capacity and capability all depends because we have never seen something like that. Nobody are preparing themselves. Resilience sounds like a very wimpish word because we actually never come across things like that. So the disruption is huge. And so the thing is, I just want to bring up this point. By trade, HR and OD practitioner, we are disruptor, because we are forever asked by the organization to help them to scale greater heights or to do cultural change and shift behavioral pattern or to make sure dysfunctional kind of behavior between groups and business units will relate better to each other, or to confront the lack of equality, diversity, in the system, or to achieve a better balance between Excel sheets, tasks, forever plan, project plan, with kind of relationship, the people-centric principle, or to be more customer focused. So regardless of your role, whether you're in LD and whether you're in Come and Ben, whether you're a coach, we are always disrupting them. Now, it's very hard for us to admit this is what we do, because we like to have a professional identity as we are the goodies. We are the kind, HR people are kind, OD people are humanistic, we are there to support people. But that is not how the system sees us. And we have been an ostrich putting our head in the sand. We think people should like us because we are personally attractive, but not, because our role is a disruptor. Now, during this pandemic, that people experience us and the pandemic as a double whammy, because people experience the outside disruption about their job security, about the way they work, about how the team work. And so they experience that from outside. And as you, as HR people and OD people, are asked to help the organization to do reset and navigate for survival, you are doing a number of things to also disrupt them. So I want you to bear in mind that from the position of your staff right now, they are experiencing double whammy disruption, one from outside and one most probably from you. So that's the word of disruption. So let's go to the second word, anxiety. So there's no doubt during this time, anxiety has been actually provoked. Now, what is anxiety? Do I need to give you an academic definition when I think all of us are anxious people? It's just a degree and scale. So anxiety could be real, could be imagined, but the key characteristic is it is free floating. It is very hard to grasp it and control it. It's kind of floating about, it's irrational fear. It create constant uneasiness, that we have stomach problem, we lose sleep, our shoulder are very tight. It creates a constant uneasiness because in a form of threat, somehow we think that would do harm to us, destabilize our world, and it's out of control. And so it also produced this very unspecific, powerful sensation that has very serious emotional, psychological, physical impact. And the fact that in the HR world now, you are very big on the well-being and mental health issues of your staff is because the anxiety is having exactly that sort of impact on people. This is the sideline. But anxiety is built in defenses. And one of the typical defenses is called constriction. Constriction is because the anxiety are free floating. We have far too much worry about things, and it creates such uneasiness. And it's much easier for us to constrict it and to a specific person, a particular reason, a particular event, because it gives us a distortion. We could handle that. And what we constrict to often has nothing to do with the original source. So give you an example, it's a funny example. Before lockdown, many of us travel a lot. I really dislike traveling. In 4 years, I made 38 trips to Singapore, which is ridiculous. But so it's become a pattern. Every few days, few days before every trip, I will open the refrigerator and start throwing the food that are out of date. But in doing so, I start really scolding my husband about how come he never responsible to check the fridge and the cheese are out of date and this is out of date. How come he allows so much food to be wasted? And then I instruct him what he needs to eat, blah, blah, blah. And that is a typical example of constriction. Now, so my husband and I now laugh about this, but he says, thank goodness you're not traveling anymore. I don't get scolding about food waste. So, but what it is for you is constriction is when people have too much anxiety, they start choosing people to attack or a function to get against to, or a reason become disproportionately very big. So this is one way for you to recognize whether people has anxiety or not because of this constriction. Now, of course, anxiety is contagious. It spreads through the organization. People don't even know about that through projection transference. This is a concept by someone very famous called Bowen's study about family constellation and system theory. And he said that, we are, as a group, as an organization, we are like a piece of mobile. and we are connected to each other. If any one bits of the mobile are being shifted, it will upset the equilibrium and the balance of that. So as a result, the consequences, anxiety get displaced on each other, and people cannot stay neutral, and often very, very hard for them to stay at the higher order of functioning. And performance at a highly anxious system can become suboptimal. And that's why in academic term, we have this term to describe a system that are highly anxious. Well, how do you know a system is highly anxious? Is often you can see some visible behavioral pattern in this among these 8 indicators. You have the 4F, the fight, the flight. The flight is very interesting. People keep canceling meeting, disappearing, become invisible. Freeze is very much about people couldn't actually make any move, cannot decide anything. Faint is always there's a I'm not well enough. This is too big. Can we not talk about that? And it all depends whether people original personality and their orientation and their habit and their style. Some people become very exaggerated in their obsession of control. And they also go strict to number 8. They disregard boundary between self and others. And one function have huge comment about another function. They crash into other people's territory and insist that they have a say about how they should do things. The herding instinct is actually very scary, because you could have 3 business units, have nothing in common, but all of a sudden, they become what we call undifferentiated together. They decided to home in on a particular group, and they decided to go against that group in order for them to actually win a particular argument and get things moving in the direction they want. The quick fix mentality, the disproportionate emotional reaction, and the blame displacement. There's a lot of blame. So if you are an anthropologist and go listen to all these, to the language, people begin to say it's all their fault, etc., etc. So these are something that can tell you that you are working in a highly anxious system. I wish I could see your face and to ask you, do you actually see some of these things being exhibited in your organization? Now, of course, we are not immune to that. And when we work in a highly anxious system, there's a range of behavior show us that how we dealing with anxiety, and also give us a clue about how our clients are dealing with anxiety. Again, depend on your original personality. You can either swing this way or that way. So I work for some people that recently that they just cannot make any decision. And none of us can actually, his staff and myself who are brought in cannot make any move because no decision are being made. Procrastination in making decision is a very big barrier to effective performance because nothing gets done. Or you can have the other extreme, make snap decision. Now I want you to put yourself into this range of behavior, whether you and I are doing this when we are anxious. So some of us have, some of us who are nice and want to please people would have our need to please people exaggerated, want everybody to be happy. Or we can say we don't give a damn, these people don't worth it. And we swing between excess control, or we disappear and we are not accountable. So there are a number of things that tell us whether we are working within a highly anxious system. And so one of the things that I would really like change agent or HR and OD practitioner really pay attention, because when these anxiety are so heightened, we actually are the one who absorb them. What do I mean by that? In OD, context is everything. And emotions are data, powerful data for us in terms of diagnosis. And so when we actually work for a highly anxious system, we find ourselves shouldering the burden of this. And these are the things you need to track yourself. How is your physical fatigue? How is your mental fatigue? And the ratio of your hope versus numbness. And is the resilience pretty good, continuous flow of positive energy? What's your sleep pattern? If you don't have 7 hours, the medical literature say that there's a long-term negative effect on your health. Tearfulness, appetite, too much, too little, and the frequency of finding the funny side of life. So I would love you to do this either by yourself or with your team, just to track where you are working in a highly anxious system. So the third word is about self, disruption, anxiety, and self, and use of self. And I want to ask you 3 questions because I don't have time to go into the theological, theoretical, and philosophical side of self. You know, one can actually spend, you know, a couple of hours talking what is self, but I just assume you kind of know what is self, and I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And do you know who you are? Who am I? So there's a very common exercise, say, write 20 statements of I am, I am, I am. And so I would, this is a good team exercise. You ask each other to say, I am, I am, I am. And if you don't know yourself well, most of that I am would be about your role. I'm a daughter, I am an OD practitioner, I am a mother, I am a school governor, I am this. But when you don't go beyond the role, that means you would not actually get hold of the deeper interior of what makes you, which is your identity, your way of being, your personality, the kind of your mental model, etc. So I think it's really important. So this first question, do you know who you are? Because if you don't, you really don't know what this instrument you are using. The second question is, do you know the answer to the following? And there's a very famous person called Morris Rosenberg, Professor Morris Rosenberg, who studied the longitudinal self of Black young people in the United States for over a decade. And these concepts come from him. He's interested in whether these Black children know their self-concept. Concept is you have many parts, and whether you can name those parts and begin to say, okay, I am this. So I don't know whether you see me. I'm holding a mug. So self, if I know a self-concept, I can hold up the self and I describe. I have a mug that is cream color, but have the word joy, is very big, can give me 1.5 pints of tea, and is highly useful. And I love it because it's made of porcelain. You know, so the self-concept is how can you describe yourself? Particular for HR, when you go more and more into character recruiting, you know, can people really describe who they are? And self-esteem is really about the continuum. Do you rate yourself high or you rate yourself low? And then self-worth is whether, regardless of whatever, do I think I am a worthy person? It's a very intrinsic value that we put on ourselves. Now, those 3 things depend on how frequent we do external referencing or internal referencing. What do you mean by that? External, so Morris Rosenberg said, if we wear ourselves out here, and somebody got bound to bump into it, and he say that's high self-consciousness. High self-consciousness means forever you're referring your worth, your esteem, and who you are by external factor. If your boss didn't talk to you, if a group of colleagues are not agreeing with you, all of a sudden your self-esteem go down, your self-worth go down, and you have a lousy kind of concept about who you are. Versus internal referencing is no matter what happened outside, I know, like the L'Oreal ad, you know, I am worth it. And the esteem is quite high, and I am not too high, not too low. And the concept, the self-concept is a sober judgment. Sober judgment is not too high, not too low, but informed by rational input. And give you an example, there was a period when I travel a lot and I have a lot of guilt about being a mother. So one day I asked Ruth, who is now 33, but when she was 7, I said, I'm going to see Mrs. Denham in parents and teacher meeting. What would Mrs. Denham said about you? And she said, she thought about it. She's quite an introverted child. She thought, and so she said, Mommy, She will say, I'm not at the bottom and I'm not at the top. I'm not the brightest person. I'm smack in the middle. And you know what, mommy? I am okay. And at that time, I broke down because for the first time, my guilt kind of go away. I say, I haven't screwed up this child. She really knows. She has a sober judgment about herself. And when I ask her, do you mind not being in a Christmas play? He said, being in a Christmas play is great because it's fun. Not being in it, then you don't have so much hard work. And watching other people do things, I'm very happy, mommy. Don't worry that I'm not in it. And that is called the sober judgment. So the second question I ask, do you or do you not know these questions? The third question is Professor Jamieson, my co-author of the research. He said that when we are change agent and working within a system and need to use ourselves, if you and I don't have clarity about these three things, we are often a very blunt instrument. If we don't know how we show up, how we landed on people in terms of our presence and behavior and emotional texture, our sense of agency, and if we can't track our internal landscape and our sensation, you know, what's happening and what is going on, and how do I manage it, then we will be acting in the blind. And if we don't know our potential derailer, the triggers, the hooks, you know, the fear, the blind spot, will be a laughing stock. And I think he was a bit too harsh, but basically, when we get to the third component in our tray as HR and OD, we got to know this instrument because we are not living by tools. We are not living by methodology. We are using ourselves as we show up to intervene the system. So that's all I have time to talk about the self. So come back to this three concept. There are three-way disruption. You know, the environment are badly disrupted by the pandemic or anything, then people who live within this environment are being badly, you know, affected, anxiety are being evoked. And they turn to us in terms of particular, if you are HR lead and etc., they turn to us for help, and then they provoke anxiety in us. And it all depends how we hold and contain those anxiety. And then we start doing stuff. And when we start doing stuff, we become a disruptor. So we need to kind of shift that dynamics into what do we need to do differently to reduce those anxiety in order for us to move not just from a disruptor to safety and stabilizer and container. I need to go very fast now. And so that need me to turn to the report that this is a global use of self-research report to look at use of self. You can download that from our website, qualityequality.com. And why do I turn to it? Because the answer is in one of the quantitative sets of data. So we have 119 questions, 700 respondents from 45 countries. We have massive data, it's Likert scale. We ran factor analysis and four factors come in that is related to when I am in my optimal use of self, what are happening? And these are the four significant factors that come out from factor analysis. The top factors is when I am so relational centric in my values and in my behavior. Second is the continuous development that I'm chasing. And the third factor is very unique. I need to know my trait. I need to have affiliation with people. And that two of those things, being expert in my trait and having affiliative effectiveness that give me the right to be courageous intervener. The fourth one is self-management. Now, because of time, I'm only going to focus on relationship-centric because I believe that is the answer. How do you turn disruption between the self, others, environment into effectiveness in terms of your role? And when you read the report, some of the data that form the relationship-centric is I'm compassionate, empathetic, I put high value in relationship, I respect people, diversity, inclusion, equality are hugely informative of my action, I am open, trusting, etc. These are only a few examples. So I come to the big part of the core part of the presentation. So during this time when we execute our role, most of the time we use our expertise, our knowledge, our experience to help us to navigate through in delivering the results we want. But when we are now in a situation where our expertise, our experience, and our knowledge are not going to serve us because we are in a no man's land, and yet we still need to be responsible to deliver specific outcome, i.e. help organization to survive and make sure people can navigate through this. What else can we use? And this is about becoming an emotional container, a stabilizer, you know, a very supportive colleague, and within a positive relational arena. So if you and I mean, I wonder if I have time, I can ask you from 0 to 10, how much did you rate yourself as being putting relationship as your top work? Is relationship your top work, or completing Excel sheet is your top work? You know, what is it your top work? You know, what informed the way you work? So if relationship become your top work, then there are 3 things you need to do to increase the quality of your relationship with others. And I apologize, these are really amazing material, but I will sail through them. Number 1 is really know who I am. We talk about that. And number 2, owning our shadow. And number 3 is the 2 Jungian huge concept called individuation and differentiation. So in the destroyed temple, Apollo temple of Delphi, there are a couple of tablets of stone left when the archaeologists went to excavate it, and they found these 2 tablets of stone. Know yourself and know all of yourself. Now we've been talking about self, but what I want to do is, why does knowing yourself so important? Because we have an erroneous understanding what self-awareness. Many of us think self-awareness is an intrapersonal thing. No, intrapersonal thing is only one aspect of self-awareness. Yes, we do need to know who am I, how do I show up, what's my impact on people, and what are my intention for my action. But at the same time, we also need to have a high awareness of others, because like Martin Buber said, without they, there would not be a we. Without we, there would not be an I. Without I, there would not be a we. We are heavily connected. There's no an alone self operating. Self is always operating in the relational arena. So by knowing who we are, we also need to know who people are. What's their condition? Are they very scared? Are they high energy? And then we also need to know what is happening in the organization. You know, what is the conditions? Is the conditions looking good, looking bad? Is the leadership behaving toxically or behaving very benevolently? It is really in the intersection of the self, other, and environment, the context, in which we need to demonstrate our effectiveness. And that is what use of self is. When you and I are hired to execute a role, and we are expected to give specific outcome. And it is in this process, we pay huge attention to what is happening in the system. We are paying attention to what are the people within that system, what conditions they are in. And we pay attention to our internal sensation, tell us about ourselves. And then based on that analysis, we go into our goodie bags and say, what do I have? What knowledge, what capability, what capacity we have that I can intentionally give the system this sort of intervention, and I need to manage my own kind of anxiety in order to serve them right. And when I first went to Singapore to support the Prime Minister's office to do their change, the first 6 trips, the minute I landed in Singapore, I have nonstop diarrhea for about 3 to 4 days. Somatically, it is powerful data. I am forced to, be aware of the internal sensation I have. And then I pick up the conditions where others in, because Singapore basically have no margin of error. You're not really allowed to make a mistake. It's become a very shameful thing. And then that get projected to me, et cetera, et cetera. But I know what the system need is to get out of that and become in a spacious place to really work with citizens. And this is what use of self mean. Now in the report, you have 60 definitions. So the first thing is we need to know ourselves in order to improve the relationship. The second is we need to get to know our shadow. Now, shadow is a word that many of you use indiscriminately, but basically they come out from these two men, Freud and Jung, and they have very treatment of this word. So Freud is much more into the dark stuff, is something that you don't want to know, you don't want to be seen to, you have no wish to be, is what other people do, you don't do, is quite unpleasant, and you hide them. And Jung talk about, no, some of the shadow is we have very audacious ambition, but our organization think we are stupid to have such thing. And so we can have powerful drive, brilliant dreams that we put in shadow because they are not acceptable. Now this concept of shadow is very well put together by an American poet called Robert Blythe. Robert Blythe has been working with men's work for a long time. And he said that when you and I were born, we are like a fireball. This fireball is working very, very courageously, bumping around and trying these things. But very soon, through the early caregiver, that we were told, mommy won't like it, this won't be acceptable, no, you mustn't do that. And Robert Blythe said we begin to slide off pieces of us, and in order to gain approval. But those things are still us. So Robert Blythe talked about we have a bag. We then have a bag to put this stuff in. And then we go to kindergarten, then we go to school, then we have teachers saying that, then when we have a teenager, we have peer group, then when we have young adult. And at the end, all of us have a bag. He said that when he and his twin brother turned 12, they have a bag a mile long, full of things that are not really acceptable to people. And in order for them to gain approval, he said that in their village, that the Blythe twins are the best boy ever. And he said, but they don't know our bags are so heavy. And these bags can be sealed. And these bags are things that you reject and go into exile. So, of course, we put different things in a bag, depends on our gender, our religion, our national culture, our class, and our parental upbringing. And it's very hard to own these bags, what's in the bag. And therefore, Jung talk about the easiest way is to observe others. When we observe others, we thought, oh, didn't like that. And that's what called projection. And then we say, oh, we didn't like that. Why am I so disproportionately rejecting this? And when we don't own our shadow, we cast the shadow to others. So we make up archetype about, yeah, those senior leaders are like that. Yeah, the marketing people are awful. Well, who do they think they are? R&D. They think they are God. But we are the manufacturing people. They don't own their shadow, they transfer what they want, and they can't actually build authentic. And that's why authentic relationship would never have a chance. Now, why is it so hard to know about our shadow? And this is when young students ask Jung, how come it's so hard for us to find out what these shadows are? And he answered them in a riddle. He said, how can you actually see the lion who have swallowed you up? And so how do you find a lion that has swallowed you up? So many of us have no clue what are the things we have put in a bags and rejected and put a seal. So I am talking about generic side, but there's a very deep personal development side for you. We need to come out from the lion. We need to begin to actually own the shadow work. We need to say, I am totally capable of internal violence. One day, I said to my husband, I wish so-and-so be dead through the COVID. And so-and-so is an old lady we supported for 20 some years, and she's getting so difficult. And I wish her dead, that COVID would kill her, so I never have to take care of her. And my husband turned around, look at me and say, who else do you wish COVID will kill them? And then we start laughing. He said, you don't mean that. I say, I don't mean that. I love her dearly. But I did not reject that is the shadow within me, because that is the inner violence we all capable for. And we need to kind of really integrate the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful all within us, so that we can forgive ourselves and learn to love even our rot. And this is what's in a particular article about. And that will help us to really become amazing in our relationship, because relationship has problem because we expect perfection. We expect we be quite perfect, even though we don't like ourselves. So anybody dare to criticize us, we get very pissed off. And we also expect people to be perfect in their interaction with us. If they're not, they're disrespectful, they don't like us. But Parker Palmer, as you know, a powerful person in leadership development, he has this wonderful quote. He say, healthy leaders are those who have penetrated their own inner darkness, embrace those shadows as a first step to bringing light. And so wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as part of integrated life. There's a British Jungian therapist called Liz Green. Liz Green says shadow is our persecutor. Shadow is our suffering. And yet when we embrace it, it becomes our redeemer. And so the last things that we need to develop, Mike, I'm almost there, okay? So the third things that would help us to develop our relationship with people is what Jung talked about, individuation and differentiation. Now, I attended 2 workshops, 7 days each, just to get to know about these 2 concepts. So I tried to do it in 2 minutes. Individuation in Jung is, in our development, we become so clear about who you are, who I am. And so we have a clearly defined sense of self, which is something I talk about. And then, so once we get that, we then began to have personal conviction. So when other people pressurize us to do otherwise, we don't need to give into that, because individuation work with differentiation. Differentiation meaning when we know who we are, we can be independent, we have a sense of autonomy, and we can like the people as well as disagree with them. And Ira Sheflet, if you don't know this person, read up his things. He has written a book about courageous follower, intelligent disobedience. In time like this, HR people, you're the conscience of the organization. Leaders don't know what to do. You have to be disobedient followers and intelligent disobedience kind of people, talk back advocate. And you and I can't do that to protect the people if we don't have that sense of autonomy, and we can separate emotion from calm logic. But one of the things that Jung said, you and I can't do that unless we can transcend the needs of group attachment and group approval. If we forever are hanging around wanting the group to give us approval and long for the group to actually attach to us, we attach to them, we can never be individuated and differentiated to do amazing work. So those are the 3 areas that really would help us to function well in a highly conscious, anxious system. Because what a highly anxious system needs is a relational container, and that is you and me. We become a container within a positive relationship so that our calm and logical mind will be trusted by them. We need to practice the non-reactive presence. This life is not very fair. Some of you are naturally calm, even though you're very panicky inside. And some of us are not naturally calm, but we need to practice that because the system needs us to be that. The most important is they need benevolent and supportive action. And that, working on the disruption self and doing those two areas of development and how to function in an anxious system will equip us to do the work of OD. That we need healing because we are the instrument, we are the methodology, we are the intervention, and we need to be healthy. We need to work through the unresolved issue. We also need to bring light instead of casting shadow to individual and groups. And we also need to help organizations to build incredibly healthy system, which is another topic. So at the end, during this time, the quality of interaction that is badly needed in organization is someone like you and me will inspire hope, affirming a sense of significance of people. Say, I see you, like the African proverb, and you are important. I'll give you really the dignity of feedback. That means I can be challenging and tough, but I'm committed to your growth, and together we can. And when we do that, we will actually do that. In the report, I asked people, what impact do you personally feel when your best use of self is happening? Look at these words. He said, when my best self is happening, I provide safety and spaciousness for people. People literally become bigger and more confident. And people perception and sight are better. They can see things. They have generative new perspective. They're able to take action to shift anything. They actually become more aware, more open, able to impact. This is the list where organization needs now. People need to be in spacious place and feel safe, feel bigger, feel more confident to chart those uncharted territory. They need to be able not to freeze, but to take action. And so when you and I are doing that, I asked the respondent in the report, how do you feel if you're doing that? And these are wonderful things, which I'm closing on soon, which is I'm fulfilling my life purpose. I don't know why you get into the field of HR and OD. None of us get into these two things just because it's a job that we can pay our mortgage. There is a calling behind that. I feel centered, I feel grounded, I feel happy, I feel joyful. It gives me reassurance by fine-tuning myself, I'm able to impact. So at the end of this, when you get together with your team, reflect some of these questions. They are here in a slide. And then to think about what type of development opportunity activities that you need to do. But besides doing development work, these are not your normal development work, receiving coaching, mentoring, supervision, and also have some spiritual practice, engaging in reflective practice. And it is a very different types of journey because it is the journey inward rather than the journey outward. It's not just about learning knowledge, but learning about who you are, how you show up. But the most important thing is this, that in time like this, if you don't care for yourself, then you will get burnt out. Parker Palmer says, self-care is never a selfish act. It is only a good stewardship of the only gift I have. The gift I was put on earth to offer to others. So check whether you're working far too much, you're not sleeping, you're not doing this. You need to do the self-care. And every situation, system, or encounter we enter is a very good opportunity to be your best self. And the world needs the beacon of life. And I'm sorry I've gone over time, and that's it.
You've gone way over time, Mee-Yan, and we were all edging on the edge of our seats there, wondering when you were really going to stop. But that was absolutely brilliant. And loads of questions come in, and an interesting one here from good friend Nick Holly. Shall I read it, Nick? And then you might want to augment it. But Nick say, I believe that what Mee-Yan says has had a massive impact on HR. The classic who cares for the carer syndrome. What would you advise HRDs, HR professionals to do as leaders to ensure that their teams are helping the business survive and thrive, whilst not being paralyzed by the stress involved in this role, which during the pandemic has been exaggerated by the stress they are feeling in all the other aspects of their lives? Well, you kind of answered that towards the end. But I wonder if you just embellish that a little bit and maybe make a further comment on that.
I think a simple act rather than fancy act, you know, instead of meeting just for task, and make sure that there's a meeting somewhere once every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where you use emojo or use continuum for each of you to declare to each other, where are you in terms of where things are, and then begin to act of disclosure. And disclosure, vulnerability always create contact. And so that's the way to start.
Couple of thoughts here, Mee-Yan. Thank you. Both inspirational and challenging. I think probably most of us would agree with that. I think that's excellent. Where's Karen Ward? Karen Ward's made a very interesting. Do you want to tell us your comment there, Karen, rather than me read it out?
Yeah, so it was just a reflection on what Mee-Yan, you were saying about being in relationship. And what I'm noticing is in the system I'm currently working in is where what's happened has really focused the fact that some relationships need to end. There's been an avoidance of ending, and that part of having a healthy organisation is also there's a circle of life, and with that comes endings. And so I'm just noticing that sometimes relationships doesn't mean that you sustain them. You also have to have the courage to end things that are no longer working. So it was just an observation as you were talking about that.
Yes, and then ending can also be done with such dignity. And then that is what's important, you know.
How do you end well? Yeah.
How do you end well, and how do you be respectful? Yeah, thank you, Karen.
And just a couple of comments. So a number of people have asked on chat about references. Of course, we'll include those, and we'll include access to the research report that Mee-Yan was referred to, which is very, very good reading. We'll send you the link to that, so don't worry about that. Well, Tasha, you're looking very reflective and very thoughtful there. You had a comment. What was that?
Yeah, in my experience, everything gets done via relationships. Trust is built, rapport is built, and that's the basis of getting anything changed in my experience. Having worked for two highly cynical organizations over the last 2 years, very insular, they like what they know what they like. The only way you're going to get people to do things differently is by building trust and rapport, and that's through relationship. Couldn't agree more. It's in fact, it's quite, bizarrely, I found it quite reassuring to find that actually at the core of what you were presenting. So thank you very much for that. I thought some of the comments here about it being inspiring and a fabulous presentation, I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, when the data first came out, I was amazed, and I thought, really? These things rank the top? You know, I don't know what I was expecting. You know, really know your trait, and other things might be more important. But consistently, relationship-centric score the highest. And then, of course, that's what's important in time like this, because when you and I can't show off our expertise and our knowledge, and yet you need to be the rudder and to be the container, and that need to be held by some sort of really authentic relationship. So thank you for saying that.
And a nice question here from Dawn Powell. She would be interested, Mee-Yan, in hearing a little bit more about the shadow aspect under internal landscape. Could you just say a little bit more about that?
So the shadow is basically shadow is anything that we figure out is not acceptable to the world, or at least to those people whom we rely to draw love and nourishment from. And so it doesn't need to be bad, you know. So for Chinese culture, women who talk too much are not acceptable. So extrovert become a very quickly introvert in order to be accepted as a feminine Asian woman in order to get traction. So anything that are not acceptable, you hide. But if that aspect of you is part of the core you, the essential self, then throughout life, that once you ban it, exile, it kind of chop part of you off. And so that's what Blythe is talking about. It doesn't go away, sit in a bag. And there's a writer called Janet Hartberg. She said that when we use power, we're using power all along, and all of a sudden we hit the wall. And the wall could be midlife, could be a disastrous work situation, could be marriage breakup. When we hit the wall, the stuff in the bag would have no choice but come out because of that force of hitting the wall. And if you never pay attention to those internal landscape is describing how our internal work. And so I have two women CEO, both of them quit work at the heights of their success. One gone to Glasgow University to study costume designing, and the other one went to VSO to work in Malawi. And so you then pretty much know their back has burst open, you know, and in Chinese culture, if you're not doctor, engineer, whatever, you're nobody. And there is a progressive, massive entry from Chinese mainland people to art and creative art. And because that aspect is not acceptable. So it's paying attention to the internal landscape, you're yearning. Every time you see people, you feel jealous. Why are they doing that? I'm not doing that. And begin to say, which is the essential bit of me that has been sliced off and put in a bag? I need to take it out of the bag, and now I need to live that life. I don't know whether that helps, Dawn. If not, you can write to me and we can have a conversation on this.
And two of the people who are on the call, I'd be interested in their perspectives on what you said. I don't know Jane Storm, whether Jane Storm's still on the call, or Beata from Triton. Just putting your own experiences into this discussion, what would you say to what you just heard from Mee-Yan? What are your comments, reflections?
Can you be a little bit more specific, Mike? Because lots of thoughts are coming through my mind on a lot of topics at Mee-Yan.
I think so, but you know, given that you're in a high pressure, fast moving environment where there's a lot of issues really confronting a lot of senior people, it's a get things done business, it's a no nonsense business, it's a successful business. And I was just reflecting on some of these issues that Mee-Yan was discussing. And
yeah.
How do you apply in the real bit? You know, how do you use what she said in your job?
Well, so firstly, what I observe.
Can I see your face, Beata? Can I see a video? Good to see you.
Hold on.
Nice
Does that work? Hi. First of all, I observe very much raised emotional states across the board, but in particular among the senior people. And a little bit, I was very interested and reassured, again, like some other people participating, that this is normal. I mean, obviously it's normal, but you kind of don't think about it. You slightly get freaked out by the fact that people either delay decisions or they rush into decisions. They're in discussions on important topics that get very emotional and not rational anymore. And they're having fights while they're on the same side. And you sort of do a lot of calming down in your job, in addition to dealing with, you know, everyone's anxiety overall. And, you know, what do? We over communicate almost. We stay in touch much more than we had done beforehand. We react to situations when people stop, for example, turning on video on the calls. We try to then reach out and find out what's going on. We talk about personal matters much more than before. We are not as matter of fact. We actually start and finish almost any business meeting with talking about how are you, what's going on, did you manage to have holiday, how are the kids back at school, and so on. So in a way, we acknowledge that we have to display much more human behaviors, because we have to allow for people feeling that it's okay to be human, you know, even though we are so result oriented and it's all about returns for our investors. I don't know if that answers the questions, but that's been my experience.
I think it moves it on. Jane, do you have a...
Yeah, I guess. Hi, I guess for me, look, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much. Really thought-provoking. I think for me, I think we're doing a lot of that stuff at a surface level. And I think the aha for me from this is just, we've got to get deeper. You know, when you reflect on the news, we've got another 6 months of this. at least. And I do think there's a real requirement for us to start getting to a deeper level with our leaders. I know for sure where I am, I think there's real value in doing this and would really help. And I think we're doing the check-ins and the check-outs and all that good stuff. But I think back to knowing who you are, how you show up, your shadow, and just revisiting that in this time now for leaders is really important, because I think that will give people more resilience in terms of how they move forward. Just superb.
But interesting thing, I think, culturally, I think is, it depends what your business is like. There are some businesses that you have to have your work self versus your, private self. And there are others that allow, quirkiness or slightly, you could say less professional behavior, which is our culture. So even though we're very matter of fact and results oriented, we allow this sort of you are yourself, which means that our dark side actually is quite present normally. So I think that actually helps dealing with it, because you're not shocked. People don't act shocked. You're just kind of like, oh, okay, we understand why it's happening. So there is, I think, having acceptance helps.
I think we've had some very good comments, and you'll be embarrassed to see all of the wonderful comments on the chat lines, Mee-Yan, about how great you've been during the course of this, which, you've given us good content, well presented, thoughtful way. It's been really first class, and in an hour you've given us such an amount of material to go away, digest and reflect upon. And as I said at the outset, Gillian will summarise as best she can what you've said. We'll couple that with your slides. We'll have a recording of what you've said, so people will be able to listen again to some of the key points, and we'll have that out within the next couple of days. And the good news is that we have an OD symposium which we've arranged for next year. And Mee-Yan's going to come and do a keynote session of that for us as well. So Mee-Yan, brilliant as ever. Thank you very much for a wonderful contribution. And thanks to everybody for taking the time out to come and listen. Thanks to everybody. Thank you.